So let me start off by saying that I think this is the most important part of your observatory. You need a good solid pier. This thing can't be attached to the observatory in any way. It's got to be on a really good foundation and not sitting on your observatory floor. If it is, any movement you make in the observatory, regardless of how beefy your floor is, unless it's solid cement, you're going to shake your telescope when you're looking through it, and that's going to be a real nuisance. So we'll open the floor up here and have a look. So as you can see, this is sitting on a cement pillar. Now this goes down to bedrock, which unfortunately for me wasn't very far. I could only go down about 2.5 feet. From that point, because I didn't feel I was deep enough, I drilled about 6 holes into the end of the bedrock and then put reinforcing rod down into those holes, and then I put my sono tube over top of the reinforcing rod and poured the cement in. So that made this thing really well attached, and it's been terrifically sturdy. The other thing you'll notice is I've got this gasket material here under each bolt. Just to give a little extra cushioning, I put a couple of layers of gasket material in there when I was tightening it down, just to work as a little bit of a shock absorber. And the other thing with this pier is it's a 6-inch steel pipe that I made the flanges for. This flange, bottom flange, I found in a junkyard and welded in place. And then I made the top flange, and there's a plug in it, and just to deaden this thing as much as possible so there's no ringing to it whatsoever, it's filled with sand. So this pier, as a result, is extremely heavy and unbelievably sturdy. It has really worked well. So that is the most important part for your observatory. If your telescope is not sitting rock solid, you're going to have an issue with it. Just walking in your observatory would be a problem. Now the only way to avoid this is if you've actually got a cement floor in your observatory, and you need a very thick piece of cement where the pier is going to be mounted to, because you don't want that cracking and you don't want any vibration going into it. So that was a real big, important design feature that I took into consideration when building the observatory. Now, one of the things I did, you can see I've got a couple of small fold-up doors here because I wanted to get as much height on the telescope as I could, and this is sitting at about 5.5 feet here. That way, when the telescope is pointed up into the air, and in some cases you're going to be pointed pretty close to straight up, you don't really have to lay on the ground to look into your eyepiece. So this gave me the ability to give that little extra height, and I got that because my rafters, of course, are sitting on top of tripled up 2x4s that have got my casters on it. Now it's important that you get a good quality caster, because you don't want to have to replace these things partway through. That could be a real pain in the butt. The other thing I did to help make sure things rolled really easy was I got a piece of aluminum inside here. I'll show you on the other side. So this is 1/8 thick aluminum that I bent and screwed down to the top here for nice smooth running of my casters. Now the one mistake I made with this is I only bent it up on one side. I should have made a full C channel just to help make sure everything rolled along quite perfectly. Now I haven't had any issue with it. I've got this wood piece along here and it can't really go off track, but nevertheless it would be my recommendation to have a full metal C channel in here, and aluminum is the ideal material because it's not going to rust no matter what. Now when I first built this observatory anyway, I was running on solar power, so I had deep cycle batteries, so I've got a number of lights still in place that I got through Canadian Tire that ran all my lighting and ran the telescope out here. But that turned out to be more of a nuisance than it was really worth. So after about 2 years of running on solar power, I changed over and dug a line in from the house and buried it. So I now have 110 power coming out here. So I've got these outdoor lights that have got red light bulbs in them, and I've got one light that has a white light bulb in it. And these things work quite nice. My red lights I've got on dimmer switches, which really works well. You want to have that, because as your night vision comes, you want to be able to turn those things farther and farther down to the point that you turn them right off. So that works really well. I've been very pleased with that. For your roof, it is really important to have good hold downs once you roll your roof into place. Now I've got these big adjustable hooks that hook into eye loops in the roof when it comes into position. Now this works really well. The one thing you want to avoid doing with something like this is you just need to tighten it up enough that the roof can't move, and you want one of these in each corner. You don't want to put a whole bunch of pressure on here pulling your roof down, because you could risk damaging your casters. So there's the big eye loop that I've got in there that I fasten it to, and as I say, you've got one in each corner there, and that also makes sure that your roof is very wind resistant. An ongoing problem I have with this is hornets. Every year I have to deal with hornets, which is a bit of a nuisance. You have to kind of keep an eye on them to make sure you don't get big nests building up in different places. And I did one year have quite a large nest building up, which I didn't realize was happening. Now I have no power off and on for this roof. I have heard of people doing that with garage door openers and that type of thing, but to me it wasn't worth the expense, and it would be a really big expense. So I just have this cable that I can put on here and pull from the center of the roof to pull the roof out of the way. And then when the roof is back in place, I've got just a little screw up there that I can hook the handle onto. And you want to make sure that you can get your roof all the way off and back out of the way, because you don't want your roof to be too much of an obstacle to your viewing. It is going to be partly an obstacle at times. Now I've never found an issue with it because I was very careful with the direction that I pointed everything in. Now I am facing south here, which is my main viewing area, and as you can see, I've got some trees that are coming up that are starting to be a bit of a nuisance, but not too bad because I'm usually up fairly high pointing. So I've got a good clear area, good clear sky here. And where I am, really, really dark sky. So this just works terrifically. Now, a mistake I would say I made was I went with asphalt shingles, which I shouldn't have done, because the snow can be a real issue. Like last winter, we had a lot of snow, so it really piled up, and I was worried about the weight up there, so I was scraping the snow off. Now, I should have gone with a metal roof, because that would have been much, much easier to clear the snow off of, and it would be partially self-clearing too. You get a little bit of sun on it and it's going to start to melt, and that snow is going to slide off quite quickly. So I would highly recommend a metal roof. Now, my foundation is quite simple. I've got a cement pier in each corner and everything blocked up, so it is nice and level. And the framing for this is made, the outside frame is doubled up 2x8s to make it really, really solid, and then 2x8 crossers going underneath the plywood. So it's a really good sturdy floor. The other thing that's kind of important is you want to keep your rails clear of snow buildup. So I have these removable sheet metal caps that are made of galvanized sheet metal so they don't rust. So in the winter time I can place these 4 each on top of my rails and keep all the snow off. That way I'm not fighting with snow and ice anytime I want to come out and use the observatory in the winter, which is fairly often because it can be really, really good conditions in the winter. But it can get really, really cold out here too. And you can't run a heater inside your observatory, or you will have an issue with equalization in temperature. You'll get a constant heat wave raising up through the observatory in around the telescope, and that will really distort your views. So no heat, just dress real warm. This particular scope, which I understand is the same that you've got, you don't want to run it, if it gets down to like -15, I would not be running it, because you do risk damaging the gears inside. The lubricant is going to get thick. The gears are brass, and if they're, or possibly bronze, but I think brass. If things get too cold and too stiff, you really take a chance of damaging the internal workings of that. So -15 you might get away with. -20, don't even turn it on. Don't go out. Now, it is important to have good ventilation, so I've got one window there that I usually leave cracked open a little bit, and then I've got vents at either end of the roof. You want to make sure that you're not going to get any kind of condensation buildup in here, which could cause a problem in the telescope. You don't want condensation building up in your scope, or it could really mess it up. The other thing I do is, the dew heaters are not on here anymore, but my dew heaters, which, you know, they're very low power, they're just 12 volts, but I've got them, I had them around the main lens for the telescope. I had them around the controller, which normally I would take in at the end of the day. I could wrap my eyepieces with dew heaters. Leave your dew heaters on all the time. I never turned them off, and just to make sure that the scope stayed dry and you had no condensation building up inside the telescope, as that could be a problem. I did have an issue with an earlier scope where I didn't do that, and I got condensation building up inside, and it pretty much ruined the scope. You want to have something too in the observatory for storing things in. This was a old repurposed filing cabinet. So I've got sliding drawers in it. And I could put all my eyepieces in here. And I've got lots of space for things. Now I put this yellow tape on just to help make things as visible as possible when you're working in total darkness. Well, the other thing that you want to do is when you paint the inside of your observatory, make sure you're using a flat color and a dark color. That's why I've got dark green here and the finish is flat. I didn't want semi-gloss and definitely not gloss because you don't want anything reflecting off of your walls. That could be a real nuisance. So everything in here looks quite bland in color, and that's quite intentional. So the supports for your rails, the end supports, you want to make sure this is good and sturdy as well. You don't want these rocking back and forth, which is why I've got 2x6s that crisscross here, just to make sure that it can't rock. And it is sitting on cement and then sitting inside these cement supports. Also on your rails, make sure you've got a stop block because you don't want your roof accidentally coming off the end. If you're out here on a windy night or something like that and the roof gets caught by the wind, it could roll on you. And if it rolls past the end of your rails, you've got a real issue. Now I did put one external light out here on the outside of the observatory, and this has got a motion sensor on it, so it picks things up as I walk out to the observatory. But it is not a white light, it's a red light that's in there. You don't want this coming on with a bright white light on if you're out observing and you happen to walk by it or something. That would be a real problem. But I do like having the light out here because it does help guide me around the back of the observatory when I need to be out here during my observing sessions, or when I'm packing up or starting to set up, kind of thing. It is nice to have a light to help you see a little bit, even though it's just a dull red light. A little extra bonus kind of thing you might want to think about. Because I have got power out to the observatory, I did put an outside socket in, which has proven to be very useful. I should have put one on the front and the other side as well, which I didn't do, because that can be handy for all kinds of things. If you have other people over that want to power their scope, or if you're just doing something that you want to have electricity for when you're working out in the yard, there you go, you've got plugs for it. So those are the key issues that I can think of to tell you about. So I hope things work out well for you. Good luck in your construction. You're really going to like having an observatory. Boy, it makes a difference. You don't have to worry about equalizing or anything like that, like setting your scope out for an hour or so before you start observing, because everything is already equalized. Alright, so if there is anything else that you would like to know about the observatory, please let me know. And good luck and happy skies.